feeling like you're just drowning in information sometimes, headlines everywhere, and it's hard to know what really matters.
Yeah, it's a lot. Information overload is definitely real.
That's kind of why we do this deep dive. We try to sift through a set of sources, pull out the main things, give you a clearer view without all the noise.
And today, we're looking at recent events, specifically through the lens of several news articles.
Exactly. Pulled from Haaretz this time. And they cover quite a bit, from really personal stories coming out of the conflict zones to international relations, even some local stuff.
It's a wide range. We're seeing protests, the situation with captives, things happening in the West Bank, Gaza, of course, and wider political shifts.
Right. So our goal, our mission, if you like, is to try and connect those dots for you. Take these different reports and, make sense of the bigger picture.
Yeah, synthesize it a bit, give you a solid understanding of what's happening and maybe some of the themes running underneath it all, moving past the headlines.
Okay, so let's start with something that really jumps out from these sources. The protests happening across Israel, right? And the focus is very much on the captives.
Very much so. I mean, thousands of people out in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, Beersheba, other places too. It's pretty widespread.
That scale really tells you something, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
It shows how deeply this issue is affecting people. It's not just one city, it's a national concern. And it's persistent.
Absolutely. And some of the stories coming out of these protests are just incredibly powerful. Like Nama Levy, she's a released captive.
Ah, yes. Her account was very moving.
She spoke in Tel Aviv at Kidnap Square and talked about how when she was held captive, she felt completely forgotten, just isolated. Until she saw the protests on TV, saw Israelis fighting for them. She said it gave her this incredible strength, this sense of hope, but she's still, deeply worried about the ones still there.
That really brings home the psychological side of it, doesn't it? That feeling of being remembered, the power of that public support, and her lingering concern. It's completely understandable.
Then you have someone like Einav Zengalker. Her son, Matan, is still held in Gaza.
Right.
And she spoke at Begin Gate, really directly criticizing the prime minister, basically saying the government's prioritizing the war over making a deal to bring the captives home.
That's a very direct, very pointed statement from a mother in that position.
It is, and it seems to reflect a feeling we're seeing more of among the families, this frustration, a sense that maybe the focus isn't where they feel it should be.
It definitely highlights that tension, that difficult balance between, military goals and the urgent need for a diplomatic solution for these families.
And adding to that, someone named Cohen was quoted saying they felt former U.S. President Trump needed to get involved to secure the release.
That's interesting. Relying on external figures.
It suggests maybe a lack of faith in the current government's ability to get it done. Or just desperation, perhaps.
Could be both. It certainly points to the complexity, the international dimension. Maybe a feeling that outside pressure is the only way forward.
And Danny Algrot. His brother Itzik was killed in captivity. He talked about the abandonment of the captives being a betrayal of this mutual guarantee he said Israel was founded on.
That phrase, mutual guarantee, that's powerful. It connects this personal tragedy to the very foundation of the state, the social contract. That sense of betrayal must cut incredibly deep.
Absolutely. And then the testimony from Ilana Graziani, Matan Siankar's spouse, she described her own 55 days in captivity. Just horrific details, torture, starvation, pain, sexual harassment. And Matan is still there.
Her account is just harrowing. It's a brutal reminder of what these individuals have endured and are still enduring. It really underscores the urgency.
Yeah. And that urgency is echoed by others. Emma Neer demanding a deal that returns everyone in one beat, as a final respect for those killed too.
Comprehensive deal, yeah.
And Revital Hecht went even further, calling for people to boycott the government, stop cooperating until they prioritize the captives and get back to negotiations.
Wow, a boycott. That's a strong step. It shows the level of dissatisfaction and the willingness to take pretty drastic measures to force action.
It's important to note, too, these weren't the only protests. There were parallel ones, more left-wing focused, against the war itself, the killings in Gaza.
Right. Demonstrations in the north, a march in Jerusalem called Return Hope.
So different concerns being voiced, but all related to the ongoing situation.
Exactly. It shows the different facets of public anxiety right now. The captives are central, but so is the war itself and the humanitarian crisis for others.
And an interesting detail from that Jerusalem protest, police apparently confiscated a sign saying, "Enough killing and hunger in Gaza." Which seems odd because reports say police legal counsel had previously advised against confiscating signs, even critical ones.
That does seem inconsistent. Raises questions about, freedom of expression and how these protests are being policed. Is the guidance clear? Or is it changing?
One protester made a really insightful comment, didn't they, about the tension between, the loud enthusiasm and the responsibility between shouting slogans and pleading to save lives.
Yeah, that really captures the emotional complexity, I think. The different ways people are processing this and trying to make an impact. It's not simple.
And the vigils continued elsewhere, too. Mitspi Ramon, Carmi Gott, Nomi Perry was there, whose father Haim was kidnapped and killed. Just heartbreaking.
It really is.
And it sounds like more protests are expected, especially marking 600 days of the war. The demand for the release of the 58 captives still held. It's clearly not fading.
No, definitely not. That persistence, especially around such a grim milestone, shows how deep this runs. The family's presence is a constant, powerful reminder.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. There's also news about Elizabeth Surkoff. She's been held in Iraq since 2023.
Right, and there's some reports coming out of Saudi Arabia and Iraq suggesting, maybe some progress in talks for her release.
Yeah, the Al-Ahad report mentioned serious efforts, according to Iraqi sources, and her brother also mentioned Saudi Arabia making serious efforts.
The Saudi involvement is notable there. Suggests a regional diplomatic angle, perhaps?
The reports even hinted at a possible deal, maybe within a week. Something about releasing prisoners from the state.
But the U.S. pushed back on that specific detail, right?
Ooh, they did. The State Department confirmed to Eretz that talks are ongoing, but they specifically denied the bit about releasing incorrect Iraqi prisoners. So some movement maybe, but the details are murky.
Which is pretty typical for these kinds of sensitive negotiations, isn't it? Things are kept very quiet, details shift. The U.S. denial is important, though.
And the Israeli official in charge of these matters, Gal Hirsch, just reiterated that efforts are constantly ongoing.
Standard official line, perhaps. Yeah. Reassuring on one level, but probably doesn't ease the worry much without concrete news, especially after so long.
Understandable. Okay, let's turn to the West Bank now. Our sources highlight some pretty concerning incidents involving settlers.
Yes, unfortunately. Near Birken Village, for instance.
Settlers arrived, reportedly built some structures, and then there was stone throwing. It wasn't immediately clear about injuries, but the IDF showed up.
But later, Palestinian reports said stones were thrown at houses, people were injured, including children, and apparently no arrests were made, at least initially, regarding the stone throwing.
And then during a protest related to this, police confiscated signs again, this time reading, "Not for ethnic cleansing."
There's that inconsistency again with the advice about political signs.
Right, and 2 protesters were arrested, one for waving a Palestinian flag. Some Knesset members were also there, which highlights the political aspect.
It really does. It points to the tensions around expression, dissent, and the actions of security forces in the West Bank. The MK's presence just underscores that.
And then there's this situation in Nala Adair, a Bedouin village near Ramallah.
Also very troubling.
Settlers apparently tried to stop Palestinian residents from taking their belongings as they were being forced to leave their homes.
According to police testimony, yeah. And 6 Palestinians were reportedly injured, hit with stones, metal rods.
This followed other recent harassment threats and, importantly, a new outpost being set up nearby.
Right, and the outcome. The displaced Palestinians ended up in Ramallah hospitals, while some settlers with lighter injuries went to Israeli hospitals. And again, the police say no arrests so far.
It paints a really stark picture. People being forced out, allegedly attacked while trying to salvage belongings, and seemingly little immediate accountability.
It raises very serious questions about protection for these Palestinian communities and the consequences, or lack thereof, for settler actions.
And another report details just how quickly this displacement can happen. An outpost goes up near a Bedouin village on a Sunday.
Less than 100 meters from their homes.
And by Friday, the Palestinian residents are gone, displaced.
Apparently, there had been disturbances from settlers for years, but the outpost itself was the tipping point.
One resident was quoted just expressing total uncertainty, feeling they had to leave right away. And crucially, the report says the Army and Civil Administration didn't evacuate this new outpost, despite it being so close to existing homes.
That lack of intervention is significant. It really highlights the vulnerability of these communities and raises concerns about de facto expansion and displacement.
Okay, let's move to the situation in Gaza. The reports continue to be incredibly grim.
Yeah, the numbers are staggering. The Gaza Health Ministry reported 60 killed, 185 injured in just the last day covered by the sources.
Bringing the total reported figures since the war began to over 53,000 killed and 122,000 injured.
These are enormous numbers, and while they come from the Hamas-run ministry, they reflect a truly devastating human toll. The need for protecting civilians is just paramount.
And UNRWA is pleading for aid trucks to get through unimpeded, saying people have been starving for more than 11 months.
But at the same time, the UN reported 15 aid trucks were looted, which just speaks to the desperation.
Exactly. And the health ministry adds that many victims are still under the rubble, unreachable. Plus, these figures don't even include the north because access is so limited.
So the reality is likely even worse than these already horrifying numbers suggest.
There's a call for much larger quantities of food, consistently, like during the ceasefire. The denial of basics, water, medicine for so long.
And the UN estimate puts the need at 500 to 600 trucks a day, daily.
Which is just way more than what's been getting in.
It really highlights the huge gap between the need and the delivery, a massive shortfall.
There was also a grim discovery in Khan Yunis, Ibsan al-Jadida. 4 survivors found, but also 50 bodies.
It's devastating.
On a slightly more positive note, some bakeries reopened, some trucks reached distribution points.
But the UN is clear. It's still just a drop in the sea, especially after 80 days of siege conditions.
Around 90 trucks got through Kerem Shalom, mostly to the south. And there's apparently been an agreement on a different route after the UN pointed out how little aid was actually reaching people.
So maybe some adjustments happening. But the scale of the crisis remains immense. The reopening bakeries are good, but the overall picture described in these sources is one of profound, ongoing humanitarian distress.
Right. Okay, let's look at some other security and political developments mentioned. A cyclist badly injured in Petah Tikva.
A reminder of everyday dangers, unfortunately.
And in Germany, they're apparently thinking about bringing back mandatory military service if volunteer numbers don't pick up.
Interesting. Different countries grappling with security personnel needs in different ways.
We also had that update from the U.S. State Department on Elizabeth Surkoff's serious efforts ongoing, maybe a transfer to a neutral party first.
Still watching that one closely.
And alarms went off in central Israel after a missile launch from Yemen. Intercepted by the IDF, thankfully. But it's a recurring threat.
Yeah, it highlights the regional instability of the multiple fronts Israel is dealing with.
Then there was that whole situation with Zini in the IDF. Initially reported as dismissed by the chief of staff.
Because of rules about IDF talking to politicians.
Then Netanyahu said he wouldn't be part of the Qatari investigation. Then the IDF clarified, no, not dismissed, but retiring, ahead of a possible Shin Bet role nomination.
Right. Quite confusing sequence of events. Suggests some friction or maybe just unclear communication between the military and political levels. High-level personnel changes are always significant.
And this potential appointment of David Zini to the Shin Bet, some are seeing it as, well, politically motivated.
Yeah, concerns voiced that it's about pleasing the PM's base, maybe provoking opponents, and questions raised about whether he'd uphold democratic norms given past associations.
Those are serious concerns about politicizing security agencies. Reflects the deep divisions, really.
Definitely. And debates about checks and balances.
In the courts, the Chief Justice stepped in to cancel a judge's decision to recuse himself from a case involving the Bereaved Families Forum.
The recusal was requested by a right-wing group, Pete Salmo.
And the judge's reason was apparently because his wife was involved in a school program that kind of coincidentally had students plan a similar forum. Seems complicated.
Yeah, it highlights the tricky balance of ensuring impartiality, avoiding even the appearance of bias without judges recusing themselves unnecessarily. The Chief Justice's involvement suggests it was seen as an important point of principle.
Also, police reportedly visited the homes of some anti-war protesters right after their house arrest ended.
Questioning them about past protests, future intentions.
Seems like it. The police later said the matter was investigated internally and a lesson was issued.
Raises questions about monitoring protesters, even after restrictions end. The internal lesson suggests maybe the police themselves felt the approach wasn't quite right.
And finally, Netanyahu reportedly asked the Shin Bet chief, Ronan Bar, for classified details about the investigation into his son Yara's documentation in Miami.
This followed Harrod's publishing photos last year.
Barr apparently agreed initially, but then refused to give specifics, like who the photographers were, who funded them, stuff like that.
That sounds like a potentially tense situation. A prime minister asking the security service chief for details related to his son's media exposure. It raises questions about boundaries and potential conflicts of interest. Bard's refusal suggests he was trying to protect sources or methods.
Okay, shifting to the international stage, Iran's foreign minister sounded, well, somewhat positive after the latest round of nuclear talks. Said there's potential for progress.
This was after U.S. and Iranian teams met in Rome. And Oman's foreign minister also hinted at some progress, mentioned Oman putting forward proposals.
So maybe, just maybe, a slight thaw there. Or at least continued engagement on a really difficult file.
It suggests the diplomatic channels are still open, at least. Oman's role as a mediator seems key there, worth watching.
And in the U.S., a judge blocked the Trump administration's move to stop Harvard enrolling foreign students.
Harvard argued it would be devastating for thousands of students and an attack on academic freedom.
Right. The university president called it part of a pattern of government actions against them. They'd filed a lawsuit, too. This came after some pretty harsh criticism of Harvard from a prominent figure.
Alleging things like encouraging violence, coordinating with China, creating a hostile environment for Jewish students.
Yeah, those were the reported criticisms. So this legal ruling is a significant development in that ongoing clash over immigration, academic independence, and the role of international students.
Absolutely. It touches on some really core debates in the U.S. right now.
And just quickly circling back, we had those multiple reports from Saudi Arabia and Iraq suggesting progress on Elizabeth Surkoff's release, possibility of a deal within a week, some said.
Yeah, the consistency across sources makes it seem like something might be happening, but again, these situations are so delicate. Cautious optimism at best, maybe.
Okay, let's touch on some other notable events from the sources. Environmentally, not great news. Unprecedented global forest loss reported for 2024.
Massive fires, severe drought. Brazil hit hardest with primary forest loss, but also big losses in Bolivia, Canada, Siberia.
It's a really stark climate change impact marker, isn't it? Huge implications for biodiversity, carbon storage, just planetary health.
Absolutely sobering.
On a more positive environmental note, locally, efforts at Bezalel Academy to find alternatives to synthetic fabrics, leather, because of the textile industry's impact.
And progress on waste-to-energy programs here in Israel. First facility planned for Neot Hovav soon, others coming later, though big changes are probably a decade away.
Still, good to see initiatives focused on sustainability.
Definitely reflects a growing awareness.
Elsewhere in the region, Lebanon reportedly starting the process to disarm Palestinian factions in refugee camps.
Committee setup expected to start in about a month. Could be significant for internal stability there.
And in Syria, Damascus facing its worst water shortage in decades after a dry winter. The regime is calling for conservation.
Highlights the water stress in the region, another impact potentially linked to climate change. A major challenge for Syria.
In Europe, sadly, a stabbing attack at Hamburg station. 17 injured, some critically. Suspect arrested.
Awful incident.
And just hours after a Russia-Ukraine prisoner swapped 390 soldiers each side. Russia launched dozens of UAVs and missiles at Kyiv. More injuries, damage.
Shows how volatile that conflict remains. Even positive steps like prisoner exchanges are immediately followed by more attacks. Very fragile situation.
Okay, just a few final items mentioned. Weather getting slightly warmer Sunday.
Always good to know.
An opinion piece about a couple living separately in the same apartment after 35 years. Another criticizing Israel's U.S. ambassador over comments about Netanyahu's opponents.
Gives you a slice of life, personal and political commentary.
Also a report quoting a senior Israeli official saying Netanyahu is determined to eliminate Hamas, despite U.S. efforts for a deal. This was after talks in Doha failed.
That signals a potential continuation or intensification of the military approach.
And Haaretz published testimonies from soldiers and Gazans alleging the IDF used civilians as human shields, including accounts of civilians being killed while used this way.
Those are extremely serious allegations. If true, they constitute grave breaches of international law. They demand thorough investigation.
Definitely. We also saw opinion pieces criticizing Netanyahu for using conspiracy theories, another on the Trump administration's perceived inaction on captives,
and one speculating about a Chinese century if U.S. policy under Trump doesn't change course, citing impacts on innovation.
Right. And a quote saying, calling the targeting of civilians a hobby is the problem itself. On a lighter note, a positive restaurant review for Ramses by the Box in Jaffa.
Quite a mix, from geopolitical strategy to local food.
So, wrapping this up, it's clear the news reflects a really complex, fast-moving situation, so many interconnected threads.
Absolutely. We've gone from the deeply personal pain of captive families to broad international diplomacy, security concerns, environmental crises. It's all linked.
This deep dive really just gives you a snapshot, doesn't it? Showing how personal stories, political decisions, and global trends all weave together.
Yeah, it highlights the human cost, the political maneuvering, the environmental pressures. The sheer number of different issues just in these few sources is striking.
We really hope you, the listener, take a moment to think about those connections, the themes running underneath these headlines.
And maybe consider the longer-term picture. With all these crises and tensions we've touched on, from Gaza to the West Bank, the captives, the regional instability, the environmental reports, what are the potential implications down the line?
Yeah, what questions does this raise for you? It's definitely an ongoing story, lots more to understand.
For sure. This is just one exploration.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.